Today we're going to be going over the ALTA NSPS land title surveys standards and everything that includes those. The reason that we've decided to make this video is we found that most of the people ordering these surveys don't know what they're getting. So if that's you, then please stick around with us. If there's a specific element that you're concerned about or would like to know more about, we've got time stamps that you can skip around and make the most of your experience with us here today. If you're like most people and don't know what a ALTA NSPS land title survey, you're welcome to watch the whole video. Hello, I'm Tyler Harper. I'm a professional land surveyor with Highland Surveying. First, I'd like to preface that these are the minimum standard detail requirements for the ALTA NSPS land title associations. Now what that means, the ALTA is the American Land Title Association, so that's like your title company. They'll furnish a surveyor, such as myself, with a title report, which in that title report it's going to have the description that is of record. It's going to have exceptions to title insurance coverage. Now what that means is things that they know of record that should they become an issue, they're not going to insure you against it because they know that they have the right to use that particular easement or what have you. There's times that we have seen our surveys being pulled in as exceptions, which are really interesting and can be problematic if that survey wasn't filed, because then we don't know what that survey had discovered and the title company is referring to as an exception. If you are concerned with any easements on a property, if you're concerned with your title lines or record boundary lines, which they're different, then this explanation of an ALTA NSPS land title survey is for you. Now, an NSPS stands for National Society of Professional Surveyors. So these standards were put together by surveyors and also the title agencies to make sure that there's a product that is comprehensive to meet the need of our clients. Let's start with section 3, paragraph B here, other requirements and standards of practice. So we have the ALTA standards, right? But there are other standards that are in place aside from the ALTA standards. For instance, here in Utah, which is where Highland Surveying is based out of, we've got the UCLS standards. And in some cases, the UCLS standards are more stringent than the ALTA standards. And so therefore, section B here specifies that when conflicts between standards set forth herein in any jurisdiction, the more stringent must apply. In some cases, I follow the ALTA standards because they're the higher standard of detail and care. And in some cases, I need to add detail that is required from the UCLS standards. So regardless, I have to follow state law still and what the common practice is in the areas, even though it's an ALTA standard. But what the value is this is a standard that is set forth across the nation. So if you're someone that's the first time buying a property in Utah, you know that when you get an ALTA survey that you're going to have a certain amount of detail and care, and you don't have to go ahead and research what the UCLS standards are. You know that you're going to get that. So now let's go to section D here, boundary. Now this is where the surveyor lives, in boundaries, right? We live in the realm of retracing people's legal boundaries. Now, title lines and legal boundary are two different things. The surveyor is there to help you understand where your legal boundary is, and hence why you would get an ALTA NSPS land title survey. So now, as we read here for section D, boundary, the boundary lines and corners of any property or interest in being surveyed as part of an ALTA NSPS land title survey must be established and or retraced according to appropriate boundary law principles. Yes, we've got the deed or the description that the title company has for title, what's of record. Now, why is that in this section here? To retraced in accordance with appropriate boundary law and principles, right? Yes, that's their deed, but that doesn't mean that that's where their legal title lines are. That's where boundary law comes in and analysis of your professional surveyor to determine where those title lines or record lines are in relation to where the legal lines are. Getting into a little bit more of explanation of boundary law principles, we've got section E here, which is measurement standards. In measurement standards, section 2E-II, we read that any boundary lines and corners established or retraced may have uncertainties. And luckily for the world, there are professional surveyors to resolve those uncertainties. Some of these come from the availability, condition, history, and integrity of a reference or controlling monument. So now what that means, putting it into terms that people understand, is that title record description that is in your title report is tied to specific monuments. That they may be section monuments, they could be centerline monuments, it could be anything, right? It's tied to those monuments. Sometimes those monuments may be obliterated or lost and could have been reestablished in air after such. That causes uncertainty in your property boundary, of course. Number two, we also get ambiguities in the record descriptions, meaning that there could have been erroneous conveyance. There could have been a consolidation description created by someone that wasn't a surveyor, or something where they created a document for title that was erroneous and encompassed land that they didn't own, or so forth. It could be that two descriptions themselves are coming from two different monuments. And when the descriptions were created, the measurement between those monuments was in error and created a deed gap or overlap. Well, boundary law, as explained, dictates how the surveyor resolves those ambiguities to find out where those record lines are in relation to your legal boundaries. Also, we've got occupation and possession lines. They may be different from where your legal lines are or where your title lines are, or the title line could be completely off and the possession actually is where the legal lines are. It's all evidence of people's property boundaries. So all of these sources of error, they can be accounted for, like going back to two deeds coming from two separate monuments, right? And when the deeds were created, there was an error in the measurement between those monuments, and hence overlap or gap was created. There's evidence that we can find in the field and of record to help us resolve those ambiguities. And of course, when we do that, we're obligated to specify in the surveyor's narrative the evidence that we found in the record and in the field, and the application of boundary law that dictated the reason why our measurement should be used or should be prevailed. The reason why our retracement is the actual legal property, legal boundaries versus the title. And of course, there's times when the title lines are actually the legal boundary. Again, the surveyor's narrative is where the facts and evidence are explained to defend that reality. Now, I hope I'm not jumping the gun here, but when a surveyor discovers those kind of issues, if you will, and presents our plat map to the title company and you as the client, the title company then digests that, okay, we understand that property is actually larger than we anticipated, or smaller, or whatever. And then they're able to update their title insurance coverage based on those findings. And of course, you as the client become armed with knowledge with respect of those elements with regards to your property. Now, I guess moving on to section II. The first three sources of uncertainty must be weighted as part of evidence in the determination of where, in the surveyor's opinion, this is huge, in the surveyor's opinion of the boundary corner lines being surveyed. So really what this means, when you're hiring a professional surveyor, what you're hiring is their expertise and knowledge to retrace your property boundaries, to retrace where those legal title lines are, and then produce you a document to defend that. And it's their opinion. Of course, they're gonna give facts, they're gonna give boundary law, they're gonna give evidence that they used to come up with that opinion, but that's where it gets really important. When you select your professional, make sure you trust that the surveyor's opinion is going to be, I guess, usable. And as sad as it may be, there's instances where there have been surveyors that have not followed these standards or have done their job quite right. Now, I say that with the understanding that here in the ALTA standards, it's recognized that a measurement may be precise in this position, but the measurements are yet still in the wrong position because they were established or retraced using faulty or improper application of boundary law principles. Like, as I stated, it's here in the standard, so it's known that occasionally there's times when people take on an ALTA survey or a boundary survey and they may not be qualified to do it. Even though they have a license, they haven't kept up with the boundary law standards, whatever, they haven't been the professional that they should. Even our own profession recognizes that there's cases when they had done work and it was wrong. This is why your professional should give you a clear understanding of all the facts, all the evidence that they found, and the application of boundary law for their work. Therefore, it's defendable, and you know exactly that. Gain a confidence in what your surveyor has done. Now, I've saved some of this other stuff. Let's go to section E, paragraph I and IV. Because they're somewhat related, right? Section I goes over like a statistical analysis in all of our measurements that we make. And then section IV specifies that all of our measurements need to be within 0.07 feet plus or minus 50 parts per million. So now what that means is everything that we measure, say a building, trees, curb and gutter, utilities, property corner set, all these things have to be within that precision realm at a 95% confidence interval, right? That's everything for section 3. Now let's go to section 4 here, our records research. So as I stated earlier, the title company does some of the research for us. Now what that means is that we get a title report that has your legal description, what they know of title, and then they have easements that are present there, that are exceptions. So they've done some research for us. However, that doesn't mean that the surveyor is done doing research. We still need to research the current record descriptions of the real property to be surveyed. And I've got a project in particular where I had a description that the title company believed was the boundary and what they owned of title. And of course, going through section 4 and researching otherwise, verifying that what the title company had was correct, I discovered that there were other deeds that had taken chunks out of that property. So therefore, what they had of title, area, the description was in error. And of course, using boundary law and the facts of finding in the field and of research, I was able to help them disclose the ambiguities, the resolution of those ambiguities, and get the title and legal boundaries to where they should be. And it's not only that, but in section C here, we specify that the surveyor must also read the descriptions of adjoining properties that are surveyed, except for recorded subdivisions. And that's because in a recorded subdivision, it's something called a simultaneous conveyance. So all those lines are relative. Anyway, any recorded easements benefiting the property or servitudes, covenants burdening the property, we have to read all those descriptions, research, verify that the title company hadn't missed any. And yes, we have found easements that the title company had missed. So there's value in having your surveyor be able to do research in addition to what the title company had done. And of course, going back to what our discussion in section 3 here, how are we able to know or retrace someone's property boundaries and give any value to what we're doing if we're not reading the adjoiners or researching the adjoiner legal descriptions to apply boundary law to them and find out where the legal boundary is between them should we find any ambiguities. Most of the time we do find ambiguities. Section D verifies that if there are any unrecorded documents that are affecting the property, that they have, I guess, the responsibility to provide those to the surveyor. How else do we know about them if they're not in the record and you don't tell us? Now let's go into fieldwork, section 5. This gives you an idea of what the surveyor needs to measure when we are doing your ALTA NSPS line title survey. So first is going to be A, monuments. So that's the location, size, and character of any type of monument found during the fieldwork. That's section corners, centerline monuments, rebar and cap. Commonly we find axles. It could be anything, right? Especially if it's specified in the record. Anyway, we specify what those are. Here at Highland Surveying, we like to take pictures of those monuments and then put it on the face of our document. Picture's worth 1,000 words, and so then you can see exactly what we found when found those monuments. Right-of-ways and access. So with this, you know, like the distance from an appropriate corners to the nearest right-of-way line, that's a measurement from, say, a property boundary to where people are able to access the property. The names of streets or highways or public thoroughfares abutting the surveyed property and or documents that created them. Here's visible evidence of physical access, and this is one that I've commonly seen on that have been missed on other surveys. Say like there's a field and there's some curb cuts to get into that field. That's an intended point of access and it needs to be shown on the survey for multiple reasons, because we are looking to see if there's any potential easement that may not be recorded or anything like that. If there's curb cuts, that means someone intended to access the property at that point, therefore there may be an easement. It's something that anyone buying the property wants to know about or the title company to insure against. Also, on that same note, we've had curb cuts that have had fencing or temporary fencing or any kind of system blocking that form of access. Also, a significant observation that needs to be shown and disclosed, even if it's a temporary fence. When we do an ALTA and an SPS land title survey, you're getting the state of the property when we survey that property. And if it's blocked, there's a reason why. That's not our determination of why, but it's a fact that can affect your property rights. So there's that. The location and character of vehicular, pedestrian, and other forms of access. There's many court cases of prescriptive easement rights. And at the time of doing a survey, if we notice in doing the field work that there are particular vehicular or pedestrian traffic crossing the property outside of an easement, it needs to be known about because there could be prescriptive rights on that. A property that we just surveyed, at the time of surveying, Highland surveying, noticed that there were people crossing the survey property every day. It took multiple days to do the field work for it, to get their kids from school. Significant observation, we noted that. Of course, we also need to show their path of travel. It's a notable trail. All those things are evidence and things that you need to know, prospective buyer, lender, or title company, with regards to your property, because it could end up in a lawsuit if, say, you try to develop it and they claim a prescriptive right. Anyway, next is without expressing a legal opinion as to ownership or nature of the location of any extent of potentially encroaching driveways, alleyways, and or other ways of access adjoining properties. Again, access is a big issue, and the way that land is being used is a big issue. Evidence of access to and from waters adjoining the surveyed property. Observation in process of conducting field work. This is less of an issue in Utah, but still is an issue. Riparian rights, and there's still boundary law that needs to be applied for that. Yeah, an analysis and the location of those entities needs to be disclosed. Now going into Section C here of Section 4C, the lines and possession and improvements along boundaries. So this one we're getting into character and location of evidence of possession and or occupation. So that's your fence lines. We've seen landscaping limits if there's no fences. Say like an HOA apartment complex or something like that doesn't allow fencing, but you can see a clear evidence of where the landscaping limits are. That would fulfill Section I here. We've seen tree lines. We've seen really anything that's along the boundary within 10 feet or so. We like to catch it and show its relationship to where your legal property boundaries are. Characteristics of walls or buildings or fences. So sometimes we'll find sheds that are built near the property line. We want to specify that it's a shed or that it's a shop or it's a building, or maybe it's an ADU unit and there's someone actually living there. Of course, we can't verify with 100% certainty, but if we see a tenant moving in and out or something like that, we know that maybe someone's living there. In an analysis of potential encroachments. So say there's a fence line, or we've seen buildings that are built over the property line, encroachments. It's not only just that, but We've had buildings that are built on the property line or even a couple feet off the property line, but to access the property or access the building, they need to walk to a door, and then the door swings over the property line. That's evidence and potential encroachments that need to be disclosed on your ALTA survey. All those findings are found in the field investigation. We've had signs that are built on the side of a building that cross over the property line, also needs to be disclosed. Any roof drains that come across, anything coming off the building that may come off the property line, we locate it, measure it, and show its relationship and or encroachment on your property. The location of buildings being surveyed. Let's go ahead here to section E, easements and servitudes. So evidence of easements or servitudes burdening the surveyed property as disclosed in the documents provided to or obtained by the surveyor. So especially if we've got table A item 18 here, I believe is what it is. Any plottable offsite easement to be retraced. And we'll go over that here more. But essentially, just like where we're retracing your legal property boundaries, we've had times where the legal easement location is not where the property is being accessed. Our ALTA NSPS land title survey discloses that, and of course we can help you resolve it if that's the issue. So we need to specify where the legal position of that easement is, but also the relationship to where it's actually being used. Surface indication of underground easements or servitudes. Even though you may not have table A item 5 and 6, we still need to gather some information with regards to utilities, because utilities should be contained within an easement. And we found storm drain lines or sewer lines, telecommunication lines commonly are found outside of an easement. Sometimes they are within an easement. Of course, we need to verify that the easement location is where in fact the utilities are. So that's where that is disclosed. Evidence of any earthwork or building additions at the time of the survey. If the property is currently under construction, we need to make a note of that on our survey, because that means that the site is continually changing. That lets you know that if another survey comes by and it's different from what our survey is with things that were found, you can read our survey and say, oh, this site was under construction, things may have been buried, utilities hadn't been installed yet, and therefore people have an understanding. Cemeteries. This one isn't too common in Utah, but it is common occasionally, especially in more rural areas. They wanted to make sure that there were no humans buried on the property. This can be more common in, say, like tribal lands where there's, or near to tribal lands with burial grounds. We need to consider the possibility of someone being buried there. With cemeteries, it's not very common for us to find any evidence of human remains on the property, but you can understand why it would be important for someone to know that. Water features, any springs, ponds, lakes or streams, rivers, canals, ditches, marshes, swamps running through or alongside with the boundary of or through the property needs to be recorded or surveyed or shown. Extremely important. A lot of the times we find that ditches are, say, like an unrecorded easement, if you will, for a long period of time, where another property downstream is relying on that ditch to get irrigation to their crops or so forth. We need to know where that ditch is and the reality that that may be a possibility. Springs would be important to know about. How do we mitigate that if the purpose of the property is to build on it? Potentially you want to use the spring for your benefit. To know that there's a spring there is obviously important. And we've got riparian rights. If there's a stream crossing the property, you want to make sure you're protecting those riparian rights, and having shown on your survey will do that. So now getting into section 6, this is the standard of the plat map. This is showing or disclosing how the surveyor is expected to disclose all of these findings and show it, right? And so with that, we need to show the record descriptions on the plat map. of the survey property. In the case of original survey, the current record document number and patent tract that contains the survey property. So if there's any other documents aside from the description that may be a controlling element in the property boundaries, we need to disclose those. If there is a new description that we feel should be written, and this is really common, like there's a gross amount of error in the legal description. So the title lines and the legal lines are nowhere near where they should be. It may negate the necessity to write a new description. Now, in most cases, we shy away from doing that because that's deed reformation. There's never a description that is as good as the original description, and the reason for that is when we are retracing your property boundaries, what we're doing is we're kind of putting ourselves in the mind frame of what the original grantor was. What did they intend when they made this conveyance? What was their intent, right? Well, if we write a new description, in some cases that mind frame of the original grantor can get lost or is not as easy to be found. When I do the survey, I find it because it's invaluable evidence to the actual legal location of a property boundary. So there are instances, however, where a new description is required. There are times when we are consolidating parcels into one, and to give an overall description for that consolidation is a time. But generally, and it says this here in the standards, it says new descriptions should generally be avoided. In the case that a new description is provided, they should explain in the narrative of why they created the new description. Other elements that need to be shown on an ALTA NSPS land title survey is the point of beginning. Now, a lot of times there are multiple parcels that are included in for us to survey, right? Well, we are going to be finding the boundary between each of those parcels. We also need to specify where the point of beginning for each of those descriptions are. We've had surveys that are 1 or 2 parcels. We've had surveys that are 50 parcels, and we need to specify where each of the point of beginning of every one of those parcels are and their boundary, legal boundary between them. So section IV, the direction, distance, and curve data necessary to compute mathematical closure of the surveyed boundary. And a note, if the record description does not mathematically close, the basis of bearing of where it differs from the record of bearing. So we always try to have the record bearing be our basis of bearing, but occasionally that's impossible, especially like, for example, if we have 50 descriptions that we're surveying, some of them may be on one basis of bearing, some of them may be on another. We need to specify how we put those together. And it's pretty common, believe it or not, to have descriptions that do not mathematically close. And that may be an instance where we write a new description to rectify that issue. Another note on this, the direction, distance, and curve data. So when we find these ambiguities, going back to section 3 and the resolution of boundary law, anytime that we do that, we need to specify what the record measurement was along that line, and then also our actual measurement. Or say the deed does not close. Well, we need to show what the record measurement was. Say we measured 100 feet, but the record was 90. So we'll put 90 like in a smaller parentheses or something like that to specify that that's of record, and then what our actual measurement is, and of course reference the narrative for an explanation of how that ambiguity was resolved, the facts and findings in boundary law. The remainder of any recorded lot or existing parcel when surveyed. The relationship of boundaries of the survey property to its adjoiners. And so going back to section 3, say we do find any gaps, overlap, or gores, we're going to specify where those title lines are and the relationship. And if we're able to resolve those ambiguities from facts in the field or the record, then we specify that in the ALTA NSPS land title survey. The opinion of the surveyor results from the survey differing significantly from the record, or a fundamental decision related to the boundary resolution is not clearly reflected on the plat map. The surveyor must explain this information with notes on the face of the plat map. Meaning that everything that we do, we need to explain why we did it, essentially. the location of buildings on the survey property, and dimensioning. Let's go ahead and move on to the Table A requirements here. We just went over some of the minimum standard details of what's included in your survey. There are other elements of detail that you require. You specify that in the Table A requirements. Number one, monuments placed. So there are times when your property boundaries may not be monumented. So if you want your property boundaries monumented, you specify that Table A number 1 is checked. The UCLS standards dictate that we place and monument the property boundaries. So regardless if you check it here in Utah, we're going to do that. Addresses of the survey property. So there are times when there are properties that do not have an address. We disclose that there's no address found. Sometimes the title company may have an address for it. We'll specify that the title company had the address. If you're concerned with addressing, you make sure number 2 is specified in your ALTA survey. Flood zones. Flood zones are always an issue, especially for lenders. They want to know where or if a property is in any flood zone. And so if that's an issue, you specify that Table A number 3 is checked, or that your surveyor knows that you need that, in which case we will research from the federal flood insurance rate maps and in relation to where your property is, and disclose the findings on the survey. Gross land area and other areas specified by the client. So if number 4 is checked, say it's a property that is a field and it's got a corral, and the client wants to know how large that corral is, you check number 4 and you specify that you want to know the area of the corral. Generally, if I have no specification from the client, then I'll give the gross land area or all the legal descriptions that were contained in the title report. Vertical relief. So this is where we're getting into, say, like an land development needs or something like that. This is where you get your contour lines and a benchmark specified, information with regards to the datum that the surveyor is using, giving you slope and other features. Number 6, zoning information. Zoning, generally the surveyor is provided with a zoning report that specifies the zoning of the property, in which case if number 6 is selected, then we will put that information on the survey as well. If 6B is selected, then we will show where the setback lines are on the property, so you know like where the buildable area is. Invaluable for new building design. Now, if there are any buildings on the property, then you can select Table A number 7 and get all the exterior dimensions of the building at ground level. If you select Table A 7B, then you get the square footage of the building and or other square footage that you specify if you select 2B or 7B2. If you select 7C, then you get to know the height of the building at the tallest point. Of course, there's an interpretation to where the tallest point is. So the way we deal with that is we specify where we made the measurement on the survey. Section 8 here, and in my opinion, I think that every ALTA survey should have Table A item 8 selected. Essentially what it is substantial features observed in the process of conducting field work. So improvements, features required to Section 5, parking lots, billboards, signs, swimming pools, landscaped areas. Pretty much anything that the surveyor feels may be of interest for someone to know about. If you select number 8, we disclose it. So just always select it, right? Parking signs that specify that only executives can park in a certain place. Those are signs and they get recorded or shown on the survey. More information with regards to maybe encroachments that were found or the extent of them, just always select Section 8. Section 9, if parking is an issue, which it commonly is, especially for commercial properties. If you select number 9, then we will count every single parking space on the property and their condition. So if it was freshly striped, painted, we'll let you know. If it's hard to tell where the parking lines are, we also will let you know. We'll let you know how many handicapped parking stalls are, if there's parking stalls that are designated for motorcycle use and so forth. Section 10, as designated by the client, determination of the relationship of walls with respect to property boundaries. We kind of generally do this anyway, but if walls are a big issue for you, just make sure you select number 10. Number 11, evidence of underground utilities existing on the survey property. So here you need to specify either A or B. If you specify 11A, then that's going to, what the surveyor is going to do is we're going to contact, say, like 811 and have any maps of underground utilities sent to us. That's fiber, telecommunication, gas, underground power, sewer, water, secondary water. Really, any underground utility you can think of, we try to see if there's a map for it. Now, of course, these maps have their errors in it and some degree of uncertainty, so it comes with the idea that we can never guarantee their location. If you're wanting tighter understanding of underground utilities, you can select section B here, where a private utility locate is hired, and then the surveyor goes back out and retraces what those private utility locates had completed. That service can get expensive really quick. We've had, let's see, what was it, a 10-acre property near a hospital that had been used for a residential apartment complex, if you will, and the client had 11A and 11B marked. To have that private utility locate, it was about 15 grand, just for the private utility locate and not for the survey itself. So a lot of the times people just go with section A, but yes, there's value in having B as well. Number 12, so any government-related survey requirements, so say from the Bureau of Land Management that should be known or adhered by the surveyor, you specify that in section 12 here. Section 13 here in Utah is always selected regardless because the UCLS standards requires us to specify the name and adjoining landowners of the survey property. In other states, you may want to select section 13 to get that kind of data. Section 14, as specified by the client, the distance to the nearest intersecting street. So this one becomes a little bit challenging for surveyors because a lot of times the client doesn't specify where they want the measurement from. So generally, I'll measure it from a property corner and specify where I made that measurement from to that intersecting street. Section 15 can become a real big issue and is misunderstood by a lot of people, sometimes even by surveyors, but can be a great tool, especially for fulfilling Table A item number 5 and getting topography of the property. But essentially, if section 15 is selected, which is using remote sensing means for surveying the property, such as photogrammetry or LiDAR or something like that, that the surveyor should give you a report or an explanation of errors that may be present in using these kind of technologies or geomatic engineering solutions for gathering that sort of data. And it is not a replacement for actually going to the property and surveying it. Your surveyor still needs to go to the property if section 15 is selected, and they still need to record the fences and adhere to all the other standards. So yes. Table A item number 16, evidence of recent earth moving work, building construction, and in the process of doing the field work. Section 17, this one can be quite an issue for people at times. Essentially, it's useful if you are, say, like on a state road, your property is abutting a state road. If you select section 17, the surveyor is required to call the governing entity that is responsible for that road and see if there's any proposed changes in the right-of-way. And of course, this can become an issue if you're planning on developing the property or anything like that, or buying the property, and you have section 17 selected. We discover that they're planning on taking 10 feet of your property by the means of eminent domain, and the process is going, but it's not yet known. This is where that information can become disclosed to you. Section 18 can also be expensive. So say we're surveying one parcel, but you've got an easement that allows you to use the entire parking lot. If you select section 18, we need to adhere to all the other standards for the actual survey property within the easement of that. So essentially we need a survey with the same precision of everything that the entire easement area. And yeah, we've had easements that have crossed, you know, over the course of a mile. With section 18, we need to survey, you know, over the course of the entire mile and disclose the relationship of the easement and the facility of that easement. So a big issue, not all the time needed, but it can be needed, and there's additional costs that's associated with it. Table A item 19 is specifying that your professional land surveyor carries a specific amount of insurance and that you are, as the client, entitled to that insurance information. And then table A item number 20 is left blank, and that's intentional. The reason for that is you can consult with your surveyor for other items of detail that you want included in your survey. And of course the surveyor needs to agree to it, but when we certify to section 20 here, or table A number 20, we need to specify what that agreement was and that we're certifying that we completed it and the measurements that we made are good. So that is a very in-depth look at the ALTA NSPS Land Title Survey Standards. I hope that you find a lot of value in their explanation and value and appreciation for what your surveyor is doing when they complete an ALTA NSPS Land Title Survey and do it accordingly to these standards. I hate to say it, but there's times when they are not followed and it's kind of treated like just a regular survey. Even though they say it's an ALTA survey, it's actually not. So being armed with knowing what an ALTA survey is going to be able to help you verify that you're actually getting what you paid for when you have an ALTA survey. Thanks for being here with us today. If you have an ALTA survey need, please reach out to Highland Surveying. We take a lot of pride in having the utmost detail and care in every one of our surveys, all to protect you, the title company, the lender. We take a lot of pride in our work. If you have a need for or questions with regards to the relationship of your title lines and your legal boundary, or any of those spatial intelligence questions that you need addressed in a survey, that's our area of expertise. So thanks for being with us today.